Hey folks, PowerApps got you upside down? Go ahead and click on the like for this video and subscribe to this channel now, and we'll help you turn right side up. Hey everyone, welcome to another exciting session on PowerApps design. This video is part of our solution series where we explore real-life PowerApps solutions designed to solve business problems. Our solution series videos are designed to give you complete apps from start to end that you can implement today. And in this video, we have a basic business problem to solve. How to track when someone comes to work, goes to lunch, and leaves for the day. We'll build a mobile PowerApps time tracker solution that will solve this problem. Pretty basic stuff, not a lot of frills, but an opportunity to see how to take a business need and put it into a working Power App. We're going to look at not only crafting a business app, but also specifically how to keep it super simple, which, as I always say, is important for Power App design. So we're going to use SharePoint as our data source, and we'll explore some techniques that you may not be familiar with that might open up some interesting design considerations for you, such as using the data card update property. So let's get to it. But first, help keep the videos flowing by liking this video and subscribing to this channel. Then, as they are available, come on back and check out our Learning Series videos that explore learning Power Apps, our Solution Series videos that explore business solutions, and our Mastery Series that explore mastering Power Apps design. So, let's get to it. Okay, let's start at the very end here and see what we're actually going to try to put together. So the concept of this app is for the users to have a mobile app that they can use to do 4 different things throughout the day in the flow of their day. They can check in when they get there. If they go out for a lunch break, they can lunch out, and if they come back from lunch, they can lunch back in. And then at the end of the day, they can finally check out. So the idea is to record the times of all these 4 different events. So we want a couple things in here from a business perspective. We want people to not be able to do other functions in here without actually doing first checking in for the day. So we want them to be able to check in. We want to show them what time they checked in. We want to then have some logic in here so that they can't just skip over, that they can, the next thing they can do is either take a lunch break or they can check out for the day. So we want that to happen. We want to record this information into a SharePoint list. We want to have 4 different entries for each person that uses the app per day. So they'll have a check-in, a lunch out, a lunch in, and a checkout entry within SharePoint, which will have the corresponding time that they did that. We also are going to implement the employee trust program here, which is to say that we're going to let employees actually correct times. So if they happen to have forgotten that they needed to check in and realize that, oh, it's the end of the day, I'm ready to check out, and I forgot to check in this morning, so I check in, that I can actually go in and adjust this and say, okay, I was really in this morning at 8 o'clock in the morning, and they can adjust that. So we want to give that kind of functionality, and then ultimately check out, and when they check out, everything is done. So that's what we want to put together, and that's what the app is going to look like. Now let's take a look at how it's all put together. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and get a SharePoint list together, and we're going to call it Time Tracker just to keep it simple. And even more so simple, we're just going to leave title as is. If we wanted to be correct about it, we could call it, rename it to something like user email. We'll see how that all fits in a little bit later. And we're going to put another column in here. We're going to call it activity type. And we're just going to make this as a text column. And we're going to add another one in here. And we're going to do another text column. And this is going to be the activity date time. Why we're going to do that as text, we'll talk about a little bit later. And then we're also going to put in a date column in here and do activity date. And we're also going to include the time with that because we want the time to be there. And then that's all we need. That's our 4 basic fields, columns, whatever you want to call them for SharePoint that we're going to take over and use within our time tracker app. So let's go ahead and take a look now at setting up the app itself. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is create our app now, and we'll call this Time Tracker. I think this would be good in a mobile format, so let's go ahead and put it into the phone format because there's not much going to be on here. The basic idea is that we want to provide an app for users to be able to check in at the beginning of the day, to obviously check out at the end of the day, and in between, if they choose to take a lunch break, that they can check out for lunch and then check back in from lunch. So 4 basic operations that are going to go on with this. And as has already been set up, we've got our SharePoint list that's set and ready for this to take in the data that we're going to create from this app. So let's go ahead and create it. All right, so here we are with our basic canvas, and we're ready to put some stuff in here. Now, I'm going to use something that you may or may not have seen before, but it's going to be what I call a dynamic record variable. And so you've probably worked with variables before, and you are aware that you can actually put things like text strings and numbers and Boolean values and even full records and even full record sets against those variables. But what is unnerving to me about variables is that they're snapshots. They take a picture at that point in time and they capture them, and that's it. If you want them to update again, you have got to do whatever it is that you did to make that variable actually have data to begin with. So if you did a set statement on it, then you'd have to do that set again somewhere in order to actually have it take another snapshot. So what I work with, or like to work with a lot, is what I call dynamic variables, meaning that I don't want to have to constantly go out and update the variable with information. I just want it to be updated whenever things change. So in order to do that, what I need to do is, there's no control for this thing that you can just insert in. There's nothing up here that will give you that capability. So what I like to do is I go in and I throw in a scrollable screen, and I get this canvas. And this canvas here is actually what we're interested in. And I'm just going to resize it because when you use a scrollable screen, it sets up some properties that are based on the label that's up here at the top. And as soon as you resize it, it breaks that. So that's all fine. I don't really care about this screen. The only thing I care about is this canvas right here. And I'm going to cut this out of here. I'm going to back over here. I'm just going to delete this screen because I really don't care. But now here I am, I'm going to paste this over here onto my screen 1. And so now I have this canvas sitting here, and inside of the canvas I have this data card. This is what the magic is all about, is this data card, because this data card has a property on it called update. And I have never seen any value to this for actual apps other than what I'm about to use it for. And that is going to be to create a dynamic record. So update, if you're familiar with data cards in an edit form, you know that an update is actually what is going to be stored in your data source. If you have an edit form and you do a submit, then update determines what value that update will actually submit. So in this kind of data card, it doesn't go to anything. There's nothing that it goes for. There's nothing that there's no function for this data card that you could call to make that do anything. But it works the same way. In your edit forms, when you have a data card and you have an update property, that could be whatever that value is that you want to store. It could be text, numeric, it could be a full record, it could be all kinds of stuff. So we're going to take advantage of that property. And how we're going to do that is we're going to come over here into our update property, and we're going to go through here. Oh, one thing I'm going to do real quick, because this will just make things a little easier. I'm going to use this throughout. So I'm going to go to my global, my onStart for the app, and I'm going to do a global variable here, and I'm just going to call it global user. And I'm going to set that to the user email. In fact, I'm going to set it to the lowercase email. So this is just something because we're going to use this throughout the formulas. A lot of times I do this in line, but it actually will simplify in this particular example. So now that we have the variable set here for this, we're going to use this in a couple places. It's just going to make it easier. All right, so back to our data card and our update property. What we're going to do in here is we're interested in 4 different values from our list, from our SharePoint list. One is going to be the check-in time for the day, the checkout time, the lunch, we'll call it the lunch out time, and we'll call it the lunch in time when you got back from lunch. So those 4 values every day in our list for each user, if a user did all of those things, there should be 4 records. That's all we'll ever have. We're not going to have any extra ones. It's just going to be those 4 records. So it may be less. Like if they didn't take a lunch break, they may just have checked in and then checked out. So there'd be 2 records, but that's not important. What's important though is that we know that there are at least going to be 4 different values that are going to come out of there. And I really don't want to do a lookup all the time on those individual ones because there's just a lot of formula to type up. So we're going to use this update property, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here and I'm going to put a with in, because if you see any of my stuff, you know I love to use the with statement. It really helps to put things in context. So I'm going to create a local with variable called local recs, which will just be the local records, and I'm going to filter on the time tracker app. The time tracker, oh, you know what? Well, always good to add that data source. So let's go into our connectors here, into our SharePoint, and let's grab that time tracker data source. Let's put that in there, and now things will work a little bit better. So here's our time tracker. And you remember we said we had a title column, which was text, and we said we were going to use that to be the user email address. And remember, we just set that variable, that global user variable. So we're going to go ahead and say that's where we're going to store our username. And since we didn't rename it, we still have it as title. So we'll say we're going to do that against the global user. And looks like I haven't run that, so let's just do that run real quick. So now it has a value, and we're going to say, and we're also going to look for any records that starts with activity, date, and time. Remember, this was our text version of our date. So the reason that we do that is this avoids any delegation issues or any problems with trying to get our records out of there. But it also does something really cool, which I like, which is that especially when you're dealing with SharePoint dates and times, there's all these issues with time zones and time zone offsets and all these other different things that come into play. And, you know, sometimes you're thinking in terms of the date and you say, okay, well, I'm looking for something for today's date. And you look in SharePoint and you say, oh, there's a record that has today's date. We don't have a date. You don't have a time or anything. It's just the date. And your mind is thinking, oh, well, that's just a date. The problem is that sometimes based on the time zone information, you may fetch that data, that value out of your SharePoint list, and all of a sudden it's yesterday's date. And why is it yesterday's date? Because it's applied a time zone offset to it, and that ended up taking it from 12 a.m., which would be a date without a time, and it subtracted a few hours. So now it's maybe 10 p.m. the day before, so it doesn't match. So the neat trick here with the starts with is that we're actually going to be storing the date today's date in that field as text, and we're going to be storing it in a format which you'll see here in just a second. So we're going to look to see if our activity date and time is starting with the text of today, and we're going to format today into the format of year, month, day. Okay, so that is going to give us any records out there that start with that format and that date. And if you know about date sorting, you know that actually what you always want to do things in year, month, day format, regardless of what you're used to for your written dates or the regular visual formats. When it comes to sorting and being able to filter stuff, always use this format, year, month, day, because that way, in this case, what we're saying is that if our activity date and time included hours and minutes, which it will when we're done, we don't care about the hours and minutes. We just want to have all the records that happen for a particular year, month, day. Likewise, not that this applies to this app, but if you wanted to get all of the records that were pertaining to, say, a particular year, then you would just do a starts with and that particular year. If you wanted all the records for a certain month, you would do that year and month. And so this is just an easy way to kind of, first of all, get past issues with delegations on list, and because starts with is delegable. And also, in this case, it's going to do the same thing and give us back the records that we want. So let's just close this up. There's our filter for our local records. And now we have a variable that we can start to work with, which is our local records. Now, as I mentioned, these dynamic variables, as I call them, this update property, can be anything. Because remember, in your update property for a data card in an edit form, it could be text, numeric, or record, or whatever. So in this case, we're actually going to create a record. So this is going to be a, we're going to put in here our opening record construct, which is our curly bracket. And we're interested in the 4 values. And the first value is going to be our check-in. And how will we know what the check-in value is? How we'll do that is we'll do a lookup into the local recs variable that we just created. And we're going to look for the activity type equal to check-in. It's very simple. We'll just do it that way. And I'm going to make this just for presentation's sake capitalized. And when we find that, we want check-in, this particular column in our record, to be equal to the activity date. Now this is the actual real date and time record that is, or column that is in our record. So this is going to end up having the date and the time in it. And it's a real date type and it's all fine. So we're happy with that. We're going to keep it at that. And then the final thing that we're going to do here is we're going to create 3 more columns. And the next one is going to be for our checkout. And then the next one is going to be for our lunch out. Checkout, lunch out, and our lunch in. So just being lazy here, I'm going to go through and do this. Our checkout time is going to be, our activity type for that is going to be checkout. Our lunch out time is going to be lunch out activity, and our lunch in record, our column, is going to be the lunch in activity type. And that's it. Close up this record, close up our with, and now we have a record property on the update property, a record on the update property of a data card. And because of the fact that this stuff happens all the time in real time, this is going to be constantly updated with information the way that it's supposed to be. So let's go and take a look at how we're going to put this into action. Again, our little canvas and data card are down here. We don't really care about them at this point. We've created our record. In fact, we could just make them invisible so that we don't see them anymore. So they're just not, we don't care. It's not important. But what's important is what that information is that comes out of that. All right, so next thing that we need to do is I envision in here that we would have 4 different buttons that would control check in, lunch out, lunch in, and check out. Rather than create 4 buttons, because I hate doing things redundantly. I hate putting 4 of anything on and then doing the same formulas on them all. So what we're going to do is we're going to throw a gallery in here. And what we're going to do in this gallery is we're going to put in there, we're going to put a label and a button. So how we're going to control that, though, is we're going to come up here and we're going to say that our gallery should have a table of records. And the table is going to be made up of, I'll just call these things display. What I wanted to display, I want to say check in. And then I want another one, which is display lunch out. So when we're going to go to lunch, I'd like to have them in order of sort of how the day progresses. So display on this one is going to be lunch in, meaning that we came back in from lunch. And then this one is going to be display of check out. So that's sort of the flow of our day. That's how the day is going to go. Check in, lunch out, lunch in, check out. That's how the day will go. So let's come back here and let's put on a label in here. And we see that we've got our display values because it's sort of the only thing it has to work from. So it's going to just display that. And we'll center this just so it looks pretty. And now the next thing that we want to do is we actually want to put a button in here to do the action. I'm going to bring this up a little bit so that we can see the full thing. And so now we have our button on there. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to go through here and put on change a couple different properties. And the first one that we want to do is that we want to go in and change the on select of this. So what we'll do in here is we're going to do, this is where we're going to patch our data. So we're going to patch time tracker. We're going to modify this formula later, so keep an eye on this. But what we're going to do right now is we're going to come in here and do the defaults for a time tracker. This means we're creating a record. And the record that we're going to create is going to be the title, is going to be the global user, because remember we said that that was going to be the lowercase user ID, or email address, I should say. The activity type is going to be equal to this item dot display. Okay, so in our records, in our rows within our SharePoint list, we wanted to actually have an activity type that says check in, lunch out, lunch in, or check out. Those are the values. We're not going to use a choice column or anything like that. It just gets too complex, and it's so much easier to just stick with the string. So we've got our activity type that we're going to set, and then we're going to set the activity date and time. Remember, this is our text column. So we're going to set that to the text of now. And we're going to do that in the format of year, 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 month, month, day, day, and then we're going to add the hours and the minutes. We don't really care about the seconds in this case. We could add them, but it's not important. And the final thing that we need to do is remember we also have a real date column called activity date. And so we need to set that too at this point, just so that we can have that display later on. I like to do when I do a text date and a real date, I like to just do them on the same row in the editor so that the two are together. So you see activity date and activity date time both on the same line. That way, if I come back here in the future and I make an edit of anything, I know that those two are sort of connected together. So that's just going to be equal to now. That's all there is to it. So there's our 4 columns that we're updating in our patch statement. So we'll come through here, and just to show that things are functional, we'll go ahead and check in, and we'll go ahead and lunch out. And the reason that we did that was just so that we can come back here and we can see within our SharePoint list that in fact we do have the check in and the lunch out. Okay, so now this is not very appealing because people are like, okay, well, so what am I doing? Am I checking in, lunching out? And we don't have any provisions in here for if they click it again, it's going to create another record and all this other kind of stuff. So let's start to put some more wheels in motion. Let's go back out to our items list and let's incorporate what we're doing with this data card, because now we want to actually see some information. And so what we'll do is we'll come over here and let's add another column to our table records. And we'll say this is going to be a value column, and we're going to set it to our data card 1.update.check-in. Look at there. See how we had that? It's like a variable with all of the other properties associated with it, except for this thing is going to be dynamic, and you're going to see that in a minute. And then so for the next one, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to create a value, and my mind, it goes always to the lazy side, which is to say, I don't want to type this over and over and over again. So I'm going to take this data card 1 update, and I'm going to come up here and I'm going to create a with statement. I'll create a local data variable, and I'm going to set it to data card 1.update. And now what I'm going to do in here is just format so it's a little prettier, but we can come here and we say data.checkin. And then this one's value is going to be data.lunchout. And this one's value is going to be data.lunchin. And this one's value is going to be data.checkout. Okay, so there we go. There's our table now. We've got a and our with, and now we have a table that has 2 columns in it. One is our display property, and one is our data of our check-in and lunch out. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back here, and I'm going to change this button a little bit. I'm going to change the text on it, and what I want in this app is I want the button to actually, if there is no if there's no actual time associated with this activity, whichever activity it may be, then I just wanted to say the name. So I could just set it to this item.display, and I'd see check in, lunch out, lunch in. So I could, you see that they all equal the same. I can also now have access to the value that's in there, and you see there is the value. That's pretty cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this, I'm going to change the text on this, and I'm going to make this a short time. So we want it in the short time format. So now we can see the 2 values when we checked in and when we lunched out. These guys down here don't have anything. So I want to use at this point a coalesce statement. And if you're not familiar with coalesce, what coalesce does is it will actually return the first parameter in your parameter list that is not blank. So we know for the lunch in and check out, it's going to be blank. So I wanted to display something else. And maybe what I wanted to display is maybe just the display value again. So that's easy enough. So now we see here, in the case of these buttons, there was no time associated with the value. There was no value associated with it, so it became blank, which meant this was blank. So coalesce took this particular value, which I know actually has something in it. In this case, it's going to be lunch in and check out. So we see that basically we have 2 records at this point, 2 rows in our SharePoint list, and they have values, and we see that these don't. And here's where the really coolness of the data card update property comes into play, because you'll notice in my action for this, the only thing that I have done here, the only thing I have done is patched this time tracker list with that activity. I haven't gone out and done any refreshes or reset any other variables or anything like that. That's the only thing that I've done in here. And if I run this thing right now and take a look, if I come down here and click on lunch in, it's going to change automatically to that value because our update property actually is dynamic. It's changing whenever these things happen. So let's do checkout just to be complete on everything. And there we have all of our values listed for the activities. So that's pretty straightforward and simple. Now, one of the things I'm going to do here, just because we're going to probably do this over and over, is I'm going to put in a trash icon. You wouldn't do this for your real app. I just want to do this in here so that we can review this over and over without having to go back to the SharePoint list, delete all the values, and then refresh the data source. So what we'll do is we'll just say remove if, and then this is from our time tracker, and we're going to say that the title equals the global user, which really makes no difference since we are going to be the only one using it right now for this. But we'll say starts with our activity date time, which is our text date and time. And we're going to say, okay, then we want the text of today, and we want that in the format of year, month, day. So this is going to get any records that are out there that actually start with today's date. And it doesn't matter what hour or minute that are there because we're using the starts with. So that means that we have all these records, all 4 of these. And as soon as we execute this, they're all going to go away. And notice all these went back to the way that they were. If we go back to our SharePoint list here, refresh this, you'll see they're all gone. So very simple, no regathering or resetting a variable or any of that kind of stuff. It all just happened with the magic of that update property. Okay, so let's do a couple more things here. One of the things that I want to do is I want to have this, as I already do, I have it displaying the time at which these activities occurred, if they occurred. But a couple things I want to do is I don't want to keep patching and patching and patching. So I need some logic in here to kind of catch this so that we don't do it again. And just to prove that point, it's like if we do a check-in right now, 401, we can do a check-in again, we can do a check-in again. The bad news is if we come over here, we see we have 3 check-in records. I only want 1 check-in record or 1 lunch-in or lunch-out or check-out record per day. We don't want anything different than that because then it becomes a matter of, well, which is the first one, which is the last one, which should we use? It's just too much stuff. So let's not bother with that. We're going to fix that problem. And how we're going to do that is pretty simple. Come here to this button and we're going to put an if statement. And we're going to say if this item dot display, which is our actual name, is equal to the self.text. Now, if you haven't used self before, what self does is it refers to the current control that you're in. And I'm in button 1. So button 1, if button 1's text is equal to the display text, then at that point in time, we know that that has no time value in it. We haven't set a time in there, so it's not going to have a time. And that means that we should actually do the patch. So let's go back in here, and I'm just, while I was saying that, just prettying things up a little bit. And so now we have our if statement. Let's come back here. Just to clear that up, if this item display is equal to self text, so that means that we know based on this label, because that is this item display, is equal to the text of this button, then we know that we should do this. So if we do it, now as we read that same statement, this item.display, which is check-in, no longer equals the text of this button. So that patch will not happen. It's just going to skip over it. And if we, just to prove that point, we'll click on it again and again and again and again and again, come back over here, refresh our list, and we see we just have 1 check-in. That's it. Okay. So that gives us some of the logic for doing that. Now, let's start to look at the flow of things a little bit. Typically, we would have people do things in the order at which they should be done. So right now, as it is, somebody could open up their app and they'll click on lunch in and boom, they got a lunch in. Well, they never lunched out. And maybe so far as to say they just came in and clicked on that. It's like, well, what time did you check in? What time did you start your day? Or did you start your day when you lunched in? I mean, it gets confusing. So we want to put some business logic into this. And we want to say that we want these buttons to be enabled or disabled based on certain activities. So let's get rid of these times right now. And let's see how we can put that together. All right, so here we are, and let's take a look at our gallery again, because what we want to do is I want to create another property, another column in my table, and we're going to call it enabled. So enabled for check-in. What are our rules for that? I'm just going to pop right up here and I'm going to put a comment in this. So we're going to say check-in should be enabled if, and the only condition is that check-in is empty, because we're not going to allow people to lunch out, lunch in, or check out before they check in. They've got to always check in. So we know that if check-in is empty, that this should be enabled. So let's go ahead and put that in, and we'll say what we're looking for is blank our data.checkin. Okay, so we're looking to see if our check-in in our update card has no value. If it has no value, then it should be enabled. Likewise, for the lunch out, we'll say that that should be enabled if our, first of all, we know that we should have a value, so a value in check-in, and also that check out is empty. Because remember, someone might come in and check in for the day, and then they never go to lunch. They never do that, but then they check out. So if they check out and didn't check in, I'm sorry, if they check out and never did a lunch out, then this should be not enabled. So we're going to make sure that that's empty. So we're going to come in and say enabled. Enabled is going to be equal to not is blank data.checkin and is blank data.checkout. Okay, so those are the conditions that are there. We say that the lunch out is going to be allowed to have that. The other thing that we should also make sure, I should have put this in here too. We should also make sure and lunch out is empty. We should make sure that that's empty too, because we don't want it to be enabled if they've already lunched out. So we'll say and is blank data.lunch out. Okay. So now on to our lunch in. So this will be enabled if the if check-in, so we'll say value in check-in, so it has a time, and the lunch out has value, and lunch in is empty, and also check out is empty. Now we do that because somebody might go to lunch and they might decide that, hey, I had a good conversation with somebody, we're going to call it a day and go watch a movie or something. So they decide that instead of coming back in from lunch, they're just going to check out for the day. So they click on their checkout button, that's done. So we're going to allow that. This is all part of our business rules. So let's go ahead and put that into some formula, and we'll say enabled, and we'll say not is blank, spelling it right, data.checkin, as we said, and lunch out has a value, so not is blank data.lunch out, and is blank data.lunch in, and is blank data.checkout. Okay, so those are all of our conditions based on the comment that we just put up here. All right, and our final button is enabled if there is a value in check in and checkout is blank, empty. We'll call it empty here just because of the fact that we're writing the words out. So enabled, and we'll say not is blank data dot check-in, check-in, and is blank data dot check out. Okay, so those will be all available to us in those conditions, and that should cover all of our business rules. All right, so we've got it. Now we have a new property here to work with. So what we want to do now is we want to change these buttons around. Now what I don't want to do, I don't want to change the display mode of these. And the reason that we're not going to do that is because one of the things I'm going to provide in this app is what I call the business trust mechanism, which is that things happen. You know, you come to work, you sit down, you have a thought in your mind, you start working on something, and then a couple hours later, you realize, oh, I forgot to check in for the day. So you go into your app, you hit the check in, and it shows that, oh, it's now 11 o'clock, and you were really here at 8 o'clock in the morning. So what you want to do is you want to be able to go and you want to change that from 11 o'clock to 8 o'clock. And I call it the trust mechanism because some might not want that, because it could be that someone comes in at 11 o'clock and they were supposed to be there at 8 o'clock, and then they go in and check in at 11 and change it to 8 and cheat the company. So that's really a choice, but I'm going to apply the business trust mechanism into this app so that we can see how this is going to work. And so the important point about that is I don't want to change the display mode because I want this button to actually work whether it is enabled or not enabled. I just want to do different things if it's enabled or not enabled. So let's go ahead here and investigate what we're going to do. We don't want to change the display mode to disabled because that would keep our on select from happening. So what we can do is we can take advantage of our fill. So if we take the fill here, and what I want to do is, as you know, these buttons have a disabled fill and a disabled color. So those buttons change color if the display mode is edit or disabled. Since I don't want to do disabled, but I still kind of want to give the disabled look, I'm going to go into the fill and I'm going to put in here, if this item dot enabled, then we're going to go ahead and do the regular fill, which is this blue color. If not, then we're going to use the disabled color of ourself. And so now you can see, since we haven't checked in, all of these other ones are quote unquote disabled. The other thing that we want to do with this is going to be for our color, because we want to kind of, this doesn't look so good, this white on gray. So I want to come in here and I want to say, if this item dot enabled, then this color, otherwise we're just going to make it black. So let's just make it black. So that's a little bit more viewable. I'm going to lighten up that disabled color though just a little bit, because, oh, you know why that is. I know why that is. I was going to say, I did this earlier, because we don't want the disabled color, we want the disabled fill. That's the one we want. Okay, disabled fill. So that's more disabled looking at this point in time. All right, so we've got that. That all looks good. We've got those things doing their bit. The button text is going to change whenever things happen. The only thing else that we want to do at this point is start to incorporate in some of the logic for this button when they click on it again. So let's go and take a look at our on select. And we see that we had, if this item.display is equal to self.text, then we did this patch. What we want to do now is we also want to bounce off with the this item.enable. So we're just going to add that in, makes it a little clearer. And now we want to give it some other type of action in here. And what we're going to do is we're going to update context. We're going to create a local variable. And we'll say this is for local correction, we'll call this variable. And it's going to be a lookup of, in the time tracker, for the record that is the titled by with the global user, because remember our title was our email address, and the activity type is going to be equal to this item dot display, because that's what we're storing in the activity type. And then finally, we're going to do the activity date is going to be equal to this item dot value. So we're actually looking at very, very specific record lookup here. We're going to get one and only one record, and it's going to be equal to all of those things, which is pretty much all of our fields. So we actually could have done this a little differently. We could have returned the ID of each record into our data card update property, but this was simple enough. There's always a million different ways that you can go with your apps and doing things a little bit easier and kind of refactoring things and simplifying it down. And we're just going to stick with this one for right now. So what happens is now if we do our check-in, let's check out our enable logic. Remember we said that once you check in, you had two things you could do. You could lunch out for the day, or you could check out for the day. We should also notice that if we try to click on these, like we click on checkout, nothing happens. We click on check lunch in, nothing happens, because our logic now says that these are not enabled, so don't patch any records to the data list. And we can see over here in SharePoint, there's nothing. So let's go ahead and do our check-in. We check in, and now we have two options. We can lunch out or check out. Those are the two things that we can do. And that's what our business rules that we applied in there said that we could do. Go back to our list. Take a look here. We see we have one record, and that's the one that we want. Later on in the day, somebody can go out to lunch, and then they have two options, which is they can come back from lunch, or they could check out for the day. Let's say they come back from lunch, and now the only thing that they can do is check out for the day. And when they finally do that, everybody is cleared. You'll also notice we cannot create duplicate records still. We can click on these as many times as we want, and if we go back to our list, we see we still only have the 4 that we're allowing, because our if logic in there is making sure that this thing is equal to the title that we had for the display, and then it was also enabled. And if it was not either one of those, then we didn't do anything. Okay, so let's delete all of our records here and just bring everything back to ground zero. All right, so that's the basic functionality of our time tracker. We actually have this working straight through. There's nothing magical or spectacular about it. We have one gallery with a button and a label. We have a data card inside of a canvas, and we threw an experimental icon on here just for removing, so we could do testing and stuff like that. I don't want to get control happy, but I'm going to put in a control in here just so that we have in nice big bold across the top. We're going to have the text of today and short date. That's fine. Okay, so there we go. So now we see our date up at the top, and everybody understands what today's date is, and that they didn't know already. So finally, what's next here? The next thing that we want to do is on our button, we want this to actually bring up another way that we can go through and edit this. Because remember, we're going to put the trust mechanism into place. So we want to put some trust in here. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and I like using screen blockers. I like things that kind of pop up and do their thing. So we're going to go ahead and put a rectangle. Oops, I always do that. Put it in the wrong place. Put it out here on the screen itself. We'll go through and put a rectangle in. And we're just going to take up the whole screen with this thing. And just because I should be good, I'm going to call this rectangle screen blocker. Okay. So while we're at this, we're going to do some things. We're going to change the colors on this, and we're going to make this a shade of black. And so now it kind of has that blocker look to it. Okay. We want this to appear whenever, let's go back to our onSelect action. We remember here we set a context variable called local correction, and we set this to a record that we looked up. So if we come back here to our screen blocker and go to our visible property, then what we can do is we can set this to if not is blank local correction, then that blocker should be visible. And it is visible. And the reason it's visible right now is because we've actually checked on some things and we've set that. So it has a value in it. If we were to actually look at the contents of this record, which we could, let's say activity date, you'll see right here, it actually has something in. So let's see, which one did we press on? So we clicked on lunch out when it had a date in it. So that's all fine. Not a problem. The reason that that we have that is that we've set that local correction to an actual record, which is going to be the information that came out of that lookup. So based on that, what we're going to put on here is I'm just going to, first of all, I'm going to put a cancel on here, and because I want to actually make this go away for right now. So we'll go ahead and put an X up here, and let's set its property to its visible property. I usually, when I do pop-ups like this, instead of setting it to the same values underneath, I usually set the visible to something that's displayed here. So we haven't gotten to that quite yet. So I'm going to leave it as visible for the moment. And we're going to set the action on this. The only thing that this action is going to do is it's going to update the context variable, update context variable, local correction, and we're going to set that to blank. We're just going to get rid of it because we don't need it. Let's get the syntax correct. And now if we click on that, our blocker goes away. Okay, so that's good. Now, what we want to do is we want to put in a couple of different items in here. One item that we want to put in is that we want to have, let's do a check-in here real quick because I want to get a value into this. So let's do that. And now let's tap on this again. If we do this again, it's going to set that context variable and our screen blocker is going to come up. And there it is. So what I'm going to do in here is I'm just going to throw in, let's see, let's go ahead and put I usually put in an icon for a rectangle, but in this case I'm going to simplify this even more, and I'm going to put in a label, and I'm going to set the alignment of this to the center. I'm going to set the vertical alignment to the top. I'm going to set the fill of this to be, let's go with a light sort of blue. I'm going to put a border around it of a little bit thick, and I'm going to set the text size to a little bit bigger, and I'm going to set it bold, and I'm going to set the text property of this to say adjust time as needed. Okay, and now just because I want to put this here, let's put this up at the top. So we're going to set our top margin to about 45, maybe 60 is good, and that'll give us some space to put our X up here. That just disappeared because we need to go and bring this to the front, and now it's at the front. So now we have our X on top of this, on top of our label. Everything looks good. And now here's what I want to do. So for this label, and we'll call this label adjust time, and I'm going to make this visible based on the not is blank local correction. Okay, so that same formula that we had for our screen blocker, that's fine in this case. Now everything else I do is going to be based on that. So this particular X, the visibility of that icon is going to be based on our label adjust time dot visible. So we know if this gets visible, that should be visible. Next thing we want to do is we want to come through here and put in a drop down box. So we're going to put a drop down in here and we're going to set it to this. We're going to make it bold so it looks kind of nice. We'll stick with that same font size. And now what we want to do is this is going to be the 12 hours of the day. And we're going to use a 12-hour format rather than a 24-hour format. So we'll come here and say items, and this is going to be equal to the sequence of 12 numbers. So there we go. We now have 12 numbers, 1 through 12. Next thing, oh, and while I'm at it, again, because I'm lazy, I'm going to take visible, and I'm going to say that's equal to label just time.visible. And the reason I say I'm lazy is because now I'm going to copy this and paste it right next to it. And in this case, I'm going to have the minutes. So the minutes is a little different. Okay, so for minutes, if we do a sequence of 60 minutes, then we're going to have a list from 1 to 60. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little for all in here, and I'm going to say sequence of 60. For all of the sequences of 60 numbers from 1 through 60, I'm going to make my values equal to the text of the value of that sequence minus 1. And I'm going to put it in that format so you see 0, 0 instead of just a 0, because people are used to seeing that for time, that the minutes, if it's 1 o'clock, that it is 1, 0, 0. It's not 1, 0. So we just kind of clean that up a little bit and make that look pretty good. And now we have the two in the format that we want, and we can see here that goes from 0 all the way to 59, exactly as we wanted. The final thing that we need to do is we need to put in AM and PM, because people should be able to designate if it's AM or PM. And kind of run a little bit on space here. I'm going to just move that over a little bit. And for this is pretty straightforward for our items. It's going to be either AM or it's going to be PM. So those are, oops, let's put a square bracket. So there's our two choices, AM and PM. Now, what we need to do is we need to actually make these into whatever value we're bringing that we want to adjust, because maybe they don't want to adjust it, but they should see it. So let's tackle the minute first, because minute is really easy. Minute is going to be just the minutes of the of our time. And so let's go back to our default. And we're going to set this to be equal to the text, because remember we're using a text values in there. And we'll say the minute of our local correction dot activity date. This is our actual real date. And we're going to put that into a 00 format. And now, ooh, look at that. It's starting to show what we had. You remember our actual value under there, 423? So there's the 23. We're getting close. Let's take the next easier one, which is going to be the AM and PM. And that one we need to set to our, if it is going to be actual AM or PM. So how we figure that out is we go through here, and in our default, we're going to say if the hour of local correction dot activity date is greater than 11, then we know it's going to be PM, because from 12 on is PM, and otherwise it's going to be AM. Very simple. And we'll close that up. And so now we see I have an error because I forgot to put this on there and I put it in the wrong place. There we go. So now we've got our AM and PM working properly. Everything looks good there. This one we need to adjust because our time is usually in a 24-hour format, so we just need to make this into the value that we want. Now, there are a lot of ways to go about this. I could tell you probably 25 different ways to do this. But here's the one I'm going to go with right now is I'm going to, again, because I love the width, and I'm going to say the hour. So let's get the hour out of our time. So from the local correction dot activity date, we're going to get the hour of that and set it to our little local width variable called HR. And so now we just say if HR is equal to 0, that means it's 12 o'clock at midnight. So it's 12 a.m. So we'll say 12. And if the hour is greater than 12, then what we want to do is take the hour and subtract 12 from it. So that's going to give us exactly what we want. If it's from 0 through 12, excluding 0, if it's 0, it's going to be 12. If it's greater than 12, it's going to be the hour minus 12 hours. So that's how we make our adjustment. And we can see here, we have now the correct time in there. So if we do that, let's say we go ahead and launch out just to show this. If we click on the 4:31 p.m., we see that we have 4:31, 4:23. That's all coming together very well. So now what we need to do is we need to provide some capability where we can let folks actually update this. So what's that going to be? Probably a button. And before I forget, well, I'm just going to say adjust as our text for this. And more importantly, because I always forget and then these things are on top of stuff, this is going to be visible if the label activity adjust time is visible. Okay. And now let's go over and look at our on select. And in here, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and first of all, we need to build this back together. We need to put these pieces back together into something that is an actual time. So again, with my favorite width, I'm going to come in here and say the local, this doesn't seem to be typing. So I'm going to come in here and say our local time is going to be set to the date time value of our text. Remember, we didn't deal with the date. We're just dealing with the time at this point. So we need to get a date time value together to patch back to our data source. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take the text of the local correction activity date, and we're going to just do that in a short date format. And then we're building a string here because date time value takes a string for a date. So we're going to say, okay, it's going to be that. And it's going to be our drop down 1, which is our hour dot selected dot value. And we're then going to put the colon in between because times have hour colon minute. So we'll say this is going to then be drop. Oh, let's put concatenate in there. So drop down 1_1 happened to be our minute. So we'll say selected dot value. And then the only thing we need to put onto that is going to be our drop down 1_2, which was our AM PM. And we'll say selected, not text. I wish they'd finally get rid of that. Value. Okay, so that's what that's going to be equal to. Now, I'm just going to, because it's hard to see this here, just to sort of prove what's happening, I'm going to leave this formula just for a moment. I'm going to come out here, and I'm going to throw a label on the screen, just so you can see what that really equals. So we'll just take that and pop that in there. And you can see that formula of our activity date in a short date form, our drop-down values are all coming into a string that looks just like a regular time. If we change this to, let's do 12 p.m., so it's 12:23. If we set it to a.m., there's that. So that's what's really happening within there, is that we're building up this string. And that string is what we're going to use to then pump into the date time value function, which is then going to set our local time variable that we're going to use within the scope of this formula. Okay, so let's go ahead and now put the real meat and potatoes in here. So what we'll do here is we'll say update if, because I don't want to do a patch again. I really prefer the update if because it's very much focused on a unique ID. which happens to be something that we can get directly out of our local correction because we looked this record up already at one point in time. There's no sense in trying to do a lookup again, which is something you'd have to do with the patch, or you'd have to supply the local correction, which you've made adjustments to. It's too risky. Let's just go with what we have, and we have no more lookups or anything to do. And what we're going to update it with is the only thing that we're really interested in updating in here is going to be the activity date and time. And we're going to set that to be the text of our local time variable that we have here. And it's going to be in the year, month, date, hour, minute value. Okay, that's the format. And then the next thing that we need to do, because remember, we're storing one in text and we're storing one in the actual date, and the actual date is really going to be in that local with variable. So there is our record. There's the end of our update. And then the only other thing we want to do here is, oops, I'm sorry, I called that local time, not date. The only other thing that we want to do here is that after they hit that button to adjust, we want that screen, that pop out to disappear. So we'll say local context, local correction. We're going to set that to blank, and that's it. So let's go out here and let's change one. So let's look at this 423. It's like, oh, you know what? I was really here at 8. Well, I was not on time. I was 2 minutes late at 8:02 a.m. this morning. So let's go adjust it. And there it is, 8:02 a.m. Again, just the glory of this, there were no other refreshes or resetting of variables or anything else that was needed. We just pushed that right back to our data source, and the magic of our update property on our data card took care of all the rest. So we say, all right, we went out to lunch, and that was at 12. Let's see, keep it at 12:31. And so now we're coming back in from lunch. Oh boy, we had a long lunch there. We probably shouldn't be that long. Let's say we went out to 1:38. That's a little bit better. All right. And so now the only other thing left to do in the day is to check out. And we go ahead and do our checkout at 4:38. And just to prove the power of this, I could say, oh, you know, I really worked late today. Whoops, there we go. But anyway, there is your time tracking app. And if we run this again tomorrow, all of these will be empty and the whole process will start all over again as if it looked just like this. And now we have a quick, simple mobile app. And the beauty of it all is we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 variables that we used for our time adjustment. And then we have a screen blocker. And then the real meat underneath of it all is our date label, a gallery with 2 buttons, and a data card. The only variables that were used in this were one for our local correction and one global one that has our email address in lowercase. Our SharePoint list over here is now empty because we just checked out of everything. But in our SharePoint list, we have a very simple 4 columns of information and nothing duplicated and everything unique to the person that is reflective of all of the actions that happen within Time Tracker. So with that, I will say that it's time to check out. I hope you learned a lot from this, and that was great information that you can use in your own applications. Happy power apping. Hey, what'd you think? I hope you liked it, and I hope it was good information for you and you learned a lot from it. And I hope you can use it. So, again, don't forget, subscribe to the channel, like the video, keep coming back for more, and we'll keep making more for you. Everybody have a good time making Power Apps.